Have you ever stopped to think about what someone is chosen by God? It is a deep, but at the same time revealing. You may ask yourself, but what does that mean to me? And that's exactly what we're going to talk about. The divine brand is more than a sign. It is a seal that distinguishes God's chosen ones, something that goes beyond human understanding. When God chooses you, he does not by chance. He has a purpose for your life, something unique that only you can accomplish. This is not about merit, but about grace, a grace that is available to all who open to this reality. In each one's life, there are signs that indicate that God's hand is there, leading and protecting. This is the power of spiritual identity you carry and connect you with a greater purpose. Sometimes these signs are so clear that they even surprise us, as if everything was happening in divine and without logical explanation. But if you look closely, you will realize that these signs are God's answer to what is planned for you. What he wants from you is an answer: are you willing to live this life with confidence and faith, accepting this divine brand? In this video, let's talk about these deep signals and how you can identify them in your life. If you feel you are being called to something bigger, your life has a divine purpose, then this content has been made for you. Get ready to connect with this truth. And in the end, it will be impossible not to realize how much God is guiding you. So, be aware, because the journey of understanding of the divine brand starts now. When we talk about the divine brand, we soon think of something that goes beyond the visible. This brand is not physical, but spiritual. It is a sign of protection that God offers to those he chooses. We know that the world is full of challenges and adversity, but God's presence in our lives acts as a true fortress. Divine protection does not mean that we will never go through difficulties, but even in difficulties, we can trust that he is keeping us by getting rid of visible and invisible evils. This protection is more than a promise. It is a reality for those who seek to live according to God's will. Psalm 91:3 says, "For he will deliver you from the bird's loop and the deadly plague." Here we see how the divine brand is synonymous with invisible but extremely real protection. Just as God has freed Daniel from the lion's grave and David from the hands of Saul, he does the same for you in ways we often don't even notice. It is through this protection that we can maintain our inner peace, because we know that we are not alone. Moreover, the divine brand is also reflected in our spiritual identity. When God chooses us, he gives us a new purpose, a new vision of who we are. Our identity is no longer in our human achievements or our social status, but in whom we are to God. We are your children, and this identity brings with it a sense of belonging and security, because we know that we have a Father who takes care of us, guides us, and guides us. There is no greater privilege than knowing that we are chosen and loved by him, and that changes the way we face life. When we live with this conscience, our journey becomes lighter, for we know that, regardless of what happens, we are being protected by God's powerful hand. He is our fortress, our refuge, and our strength. This security gives us the confidence necessary to move on, knowing that our spiritual identity is invincible. Have you noticed how the divine brand transforms our life? If you have identified with everything we have spoken so far, imagine the power to deepen this knowledge. In today's video, we will further explore the signs of God's brand in our lives. If you want to better understand how to live with this constant protection and this strengthened spiritual identity, you cannot lose this message. Also, by subscribing to the channel, you will be taking the first step to strengthen your walk with God. Here you will find content that will help you grow spiritually and live with more purpose, peace, and joy. Don't let this opportunity pass. By clicking the application button, you will be connecting to a community that seeks to live God's will and be transformed by your grace. And it's not just about watching the video. Each new content you receive will give you more clarity about your divine purpose. If you feel that there is something more for your life, something beyond what you have ever lived, this channel is for you. By subscribing, you guarantee that you will not lose any transformative teaching. Remember, God has something great for you, and here you will find the tools to live the best of your will. Then click subscribe, enable notifications, and prepare for a spiritual journey that will lead you to a new level of trust, peace, and realization in Christ. God's mark is not just a visible symbol or mark, but a deep sign that we were chosen for a divine purpose. When we talk about this brand, We are referring to our identity as children and daughters of God. It is the manifestation of His unconditional love and His desire to guide us by a path of holiness and fulfillment. To have the mark of God in our lives is to be sure that He knows us, loves us, and chose us to fulfill something significant in His eternal plan. This brand makes us reflect on the greatness of God and what it means to be a chosen. When the Lord calls us, He not only offers us protection, but also enables us to live according to His will. The divine brand positions us in a place of favor and grace, allowing us to experience peace, joy, and victory, even in the midst of adversity. We are called to live differently, reflecting the holiness and character of God in every action, thought, and word. The meaning of God's brand goes beyond a simple belief. It implies living with purpose, making choices that honor God, and fully trusting His provision. When we are marked by Him, we can be sure that He will provide everything we need. This brand is also associated with trust in God, which, by its grace, strengthens us to face any challenge. No matter what happens, this brand is our guarantee that we are accompanied by the one who never leaves us. Therefore, carrying the divine brand is carrying the responsibility of living to God and its purpose. And it is precisely this responsibility that brings indescribable peace, for we know that we are fulfilling the divine call and that God will be with us in all circumstances. When we talk about the divine purpose in our lives, we are referring to the perfect plan God has for each of us. Since before we were born, He already knew us and chose us to live according to His designs. This purpose goes beyond personal or professional achievements. It is about being a tool in God's hands to fulfill something greater than we imagine. Sometimes we can feel lost or without direction, but it is in this reflection on the divine purpose that we find our true identity and security. It is important to remember that God's purpose for our lives is not something we must discover on our own, but something that reveals itself as we give ourselves to Him. He will guide us and, step by step, show us what He wants from us. With each prayer, every moment of communion with Him, clearer becomes the way we should follow. When we align with the divine purpose, we live more sense, more confidence, and realize that all that we live, both high and low, have a purpose in their plan. God's brand in our lives connects us directly to His purpose. She is not just a spiritual seal, but called to live for Her glory. Often this call can lead us to unexpected ways. But when we follow the Lord with faith, we can be sure that He is leading us to the best. Divine purpose is not an isolated task, but a collective journey in which all the children of God play a crucial role, even if we sometimes do not understand the scope of our contribution. Therefore, reflection on divine purpose leads us to a life of total surrender and confidence. When we understand that everything we do has an eternal impact and that we are collaborating with the Creator for the realization of His plan, our life is filled with meaning, and the peace that comes from this understanding is something the world cannot give us, for we know that we are on the right track, guided by the hand of God. From the beginning, the Bible shows us that God has created us with a purpose. In Genesis 1:27, it is written that God created us in His image and likeness, which is already a clear reflection of His love for us. This passage reveals that each human being has a measurable value before God. We are His reflection on earth, and this puts us in a unique position of intimacy with Him. Creation was not the work of chance. It was an act of love and care, where God thought of every detail of our lives. God's love for His creation is even more evident when we see in John 3:16 that He sent His only Son to save the world. God spared no sacrifices to make sure we could have eternal life. He did not create us to live distant from Him, but to have an intimate relationship based on His unconditional love. This love does not depend on our actions, but is a divine choice that will never fail. This truth sets us free from any sense of rejection or fear of not being worthy. In 1 John 4:910, we see the demonstration of God's love through Jesus Christ, who surrendered to us. This perfect love teaches us that even when we fail, God does not abandon us. He is constantly calling us to approach Him, offering forgiveness and restoration. The fact that we were created by God and loved by Him is the basis for our spiritual identity. When we understand this deeply, our life has a new meaning, full of purpose, security, and peace. The Scriptures invite us to reflect on this unconditional love, which does not depend on our actions, but which transforms us. God's love is what gives us confidence to face the challenges of life. knowing that He is with us in every step. And even when we have difficulty, we can be sure that He is shaping us to something grand in His divine plan. The fall of man, described in Genesis 3, was a decisive moment that separated humanity from His perfect communion with God. When Adam and Eve disobeyed God in the Garden of Eden, the mark of holiness was corrupted and sin entered the world. This event brought spiritual death and the separation of God, resulting in a world marked by suffering and alienation. However, even after the fall, God never abandoned humanity. He, in His infinite grace, has established a plan of redemption to restore lost communion. Within this divine plan, there is a clear distinction between those who are chosen by God and those who continue on the way to sin and rebellion. The Bible talks about the separation clearly, as in John 15:16, where Jesus reminds us that you have not chosen me, but I chose you to you. The chosen ones are those who, by divine grace, received the mark of God and began to live according to their will. This does not mean that they are exempt from difficulty, but that they have protection, provision, and favor of God in their lives. On the other hand, the world lives in a constant search for meaning and fulfillment, often ignoring the voice of God and the opportunities for salvation. This differentiation is not something made by us, but a choice of God. He chooses, by His sovereign will, those who will be His instruments of blessing in this world. By understanding our spiritual identity as chosen, our vision of life changes completely. For we know that we are part of something much greater with an eternal purpose. This choice of God is not motivated by human merits, but by its immeasurable grace. In Ephesians 1:45, it is written that God has chosen us before the foundation of the world, to be holy and blameless before Him in love. We are called to live differently from the world, being light in a world of darkness. Although many still live far from God, those who have been marked by their grace have a living hope and an eternal purpose, knowing that they are instruments of their divine plan. The divine brand is a seal of spiritual protection and identity that accompanies God's chosen ones throughout their lives. When someone is marked by God, he begins to live differently, feeling the weight of His presence in all areas of life. And there are clear signs of this brand, which serve as confirmations of the divine purpose. God's protection, for example, is one of the first and most obvious signs. In Psalm 91:3, we find the promise that He will deliver you from the Braedon's loop and the pernicious plague. When we are under divine protection, even in times of adversity, we can trust that God is with us, keeping us from visible and invisible dangers. Another sign of the divine brand is the supernatural provision. God not only takes care of our soul, but also our physical and material needs. In Psalm 37:25, we read, I was a young man. Now I am old, but I have never seen the righteous helplessness, nor its offspring to begging bread. God has a special way to meet our needs, often in ways we cannot predict. Remember the history of Israel in the desert, where God provided manna from heaven to feed the people. So, too, He takes care of those who are His chosen, ensuring that nothing is missing, whether in a material or spiritual aspect. God's favor is also a powerful sign of this divine mark. When we are marked by God, your favor accompanies us in all circumstances. Joseph's life in Egypt is a clear example of this despite the difficulties and injustices he faced. Joseph found favor in the eyes of God and men. In Deuteronomy 32:13, we see that God gives a favor of heaven to His chosen, guiding them toward the fulfillment of their purpose. This favor is not only limited to material situations, but also to the realization of dreams and the recognition of divine purpose in our lives. Peace, joy, and comfort are also signs of the divine brand. Even in the midst of storms, those who are marked by God experience a peace that exceeds all understanding, according to Philippians 4:7. This consolation does not come from the world, but from God, and allows us to live with unavailable hope and faith. The divine brand brings with a firm emotional and spiritual foundation, where trust in God is constant, regardless of circumstances. This state of mind is reflected in a joy that transcends the situation, for we know that God's presence strengthens us at all times in life. Now that we understand the signs of the divine brand, it is essential to know how to keep it active in our lives. Holiness is the first step. Living in holiness is not just a recommendation, but a need for those who wish to remain under protection of God. Avoid sin and live according to principles of God's word ensures that this brand remains intact in us. Holiness separates us from the world and brings us closer to God, allowing its presence to manifest itself in our daily lives. As 1 Peter 1:16 says, "Saints, because I am holy." The divine brand is only maintained when we seek to live according to God's standards. Humility is the key to keeping the divine brand active. In a world that often values self-sufficiency and pride, it is essential to cultivate a humble heart. Humility keeps us dependent on God, recognizing that it is He who gives us the strength and ability to move on. When we leave pride aside and give ourselves to God's will, He exalts us in His time. Jesus teaches us in Matthew 23:12 that who is exalted will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Humility is not weakness, but a demonstration of full confidence in God, who knows what is best for us. Full confidence in God is the third essential practice to maintain the divine brand active. When we totally trust God, we give our lives to Him and surrender to His will, allowing Him to guide us in all areas. Trust is not based on what we see, but what we know about God's character. As Proverbs 3:56 says, "Trust the Lord with all your heart, and do not stir in your own understanding." He recognizes Him in all your ways, and He will straighten your paths. Trust in God enables us to remain firm, even in difficult times, knowing that He is in control of all things. These practices holiness, humility, and confidence are the foundation that keeps the divine brand alive in our lives. They help us grow spiritually and maintain our identity as God's chosen. When we follow these principles, not only do we maintain the divine brand, but we also become channels of God's favor, living according to the purpose He has for us. Now that you know the signs that indicate that God has marked your life, is it time to reflect? Have you lived according to that purpose? Are you ready to embrace the divine brand He has put on you? Remember, God's favor, protection, and provision are for those who seek to live in your will, trusting in your grace. I invite you to deepen more in this relationship with God, to pray more, to trust Him in every step of His journey. Be sure to share this video with those you know that also need to listen to this message and live the signs of God in your lives. Subscribe to the channel and enable notifications to avoid losing more content like this. Together, let's continue to grow and find out what God has reserved for us. May the peace, joy, and blessings of the Lord be upon your life.